I'm Amy Traub, and I'm a senior policy analyst here at Demos. I think this may be the first time here at Demos for some people in the audience today, so I want to tell you a little bit about who we are. Demos is a national public policy organization working for an America where we all have an equal say in our democracy and an equal chance in our economy. Our name Demos sounds a little strange to people at first, I think, but it has a very simple meaning. It just means the people. It's the root word of democracy. And that's what we're really about here at Demos, creating a democracy and an economy that empowers all of us. One of the commitments that guides us here at Demos is to creating pathways that ensure a diverse, expanded middle class. And that's what brings us here today, because early education for all is a powerful way to level the playing field and to ensure that more of us can reach the middle class and have a decent standard of living as adults. The research is accumulating, showing that quality early education for all young children reduces inequality, boosts educational achievement, and improves children's life chances. That means the investment could be a powerful step, an investment in universal preschool could be a powerful step towards building upward mobility for the next generation. And it's so exciting, especially to be talking about this subject now here in New York City, when we have such an opportunity here to expand preschool to all 4-year-olds, as our new mayor is fighting to do. To learn from the successes in New Jersey and elsewhere, and maybe even to think beyond that, from birth to age 3, when earlier interventions that can also make a profound difference in the lives of children can also happen. So now I've welcomed you on behalf of Demos, and I also want to welcome you on behalf of the American Prospect magazine, who's our other sponsor tonight. Our moderator tonight, Sharon Lerner, is a Senior Fellow here at Demos and also a contributing editor to the American Prospect's new issue that looks at early education. Our discussion tonight is meant as a complement to that issue, so if you didn't pick one up on your way into the event, please be sure to take one as you leave. We have a really distinguished panel tonight, and I will turn things over to our moderator, Sharon Lerner, to introduce them. Sharon?
Hi. Welcome, welcome. I'm so happy to see so many people here tonight. I know it's freezing out there. You could be somewhere else under a blanket, and I really appreciate that you're here with us. Before I get started, I just want to take a moment to appreciate where this issue of early education is. It's a really exciting and strange, a little bit, moment, because as some of you have who have worked on this issue for a long time know, early education hasn't always been on the front pages of newspapers, but it is right now. And for the past year, it's been this amazing year that started exactly a year ago when our president introduced his early education plan that included pre-K for all low-income 4-year-olds. And that was exciting, and that got a lot of people going. And then we had this amazing mayoral election here in New York City when, thanks to Mayor de Blasio, pre-K started to become a major issue, and then the major issue. And other candidates began to talk about it. We heard specific plans, and we heard promises, and we heard why it was important. And then he won. And then we've seen in the past month that this is more than a campaign promise, and there's an advisory panel. We have a member here. And there has been action just in these 4 weeks. There's been real movement. And then the governor came up with a plan, a statewide plan. And then last night, again, we heard from the president reiterating his support. And all of a sudden, we get that this is just, front and center for so many people. And so there are still so many questions I think we have to answer, and we're going to talk about some of them tonight. Questions of capacity and classrooms and teachers, and yes, funding. But before we dive into those questions, I just wanted to take a moment and say, wow, you know, our highest elected officials on every level of government right now, city, state, and federal, are all putting this issue out front. And so even when you have a skirmish about how to pay for it and, you know, should we use city tax dollars, should we use state money, it's a problem that needs to get worked out, but it's a really happy problem. So I'm happy about that. I am very pleased to say that both Demos and the Prospect have cared a lot about this issue before it hit the big time. Demos, as Amy was saying, because, you know, through their deep commitment to upward mobility, so they come to this. And I just want to say about the American Prospect, but that I do not know of any other magazine, news magazine, political magazine, or otherwise, that has devoted more than 12,000 words to early education stories, which the Prospect did in its last issue. So if you have a chance to pick up that issue, I encourage you to do it. And I just want to thank them for their commitment to dealing with this kind of not that sexy story in a real and deep way. Okay, so we are very, very lucky to have 4 people here with us tonight who know a lot about early education. I'm going to introduce them each briefly. And then I'll ask them some questions, and then we'll open up the discussion to the audience. So Nancy Kolben, who's, maybe raise your hand, is the executive director of the Center for Children's Initiatives here in New York City, which is a policy and advocacy organization that deals with early care and education. And she is also, as I mentioned, one of Mayor de Blasio's 6-member pre-K advisory team. So welcome, Nancy. And right here next to me is Jacqueline Jones in the orange jacket. She is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Policy and Early Learning, did I get that right, at the U.S. Department of Education in the Obama administration. But almost equally important for our purposes tonight, Jacqueline Jones was also the Assistant Commissioner for the Division of Early Childhood Education in New Jersey, where she ran the Abbott program, which is a universal program for 3- and 4-year-olds that exists in 31 school districts there, and which is the subject of a long feature in the Prospect. All right, that's all I'll say about the Prospect. Okay, Steve Barnett. Steve is in the middle, if you can raise his hand, is the director of the National Institute for Early Education Research, which monitors state and national progress on early education. They publish an amazing yearbook that is very important to reporters. He is an economist by training and consults internationally with the OECD and other countries about early education. And he's been himself very involved with the Abbott program. Yes? Yes. Rich, on the end, is the president and creative director of the Neiman Collaborative in DC, which focuses on branding, messaging, and changing seemingly intractable public perceptions. I got that from your website. I find it very hard to describe Rich without using the word guru, as in, yes, sorry, messaging guru. His clients include the Birth to 5 Policy Alliance, the First 5 Years Fund, and Nobel-winning economist James Heckman. And Rich has also worked in New York City politics, which may come up tonight. So I'm going to just jump right in without further ado. Jacqueline, starting with you. So exactly a year ago, the president unveiled his pre-K plan. No president had made such a plan before. It was a really big deal. And I'm wondering, how did they, or I should say, how did you, since you were part of the administration then, get to that point? What's happened in the intervening year? And if you can tell us, based on the State of the Union message and anything else you know, where we're headed.
Okay. So it's lovely to be here, and really lovely to be here as a civilian. You can't know how lovely it is to be here as a civilian. So I don't speak for the federal government, but I can speak to my experiences in the first year of the Obama administration. The question of how we got there a year ago is an interesting one, because we got to, I guess, January or February of 2013, starting in probably January of 2009. I think, and that's when Secretary Duncan took his position and came to that office with a real commitment to early childhood education. He had been the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools, and if you know Barbara Bowman, who is a real sort of legendary figure in early childhood, she ran his early childhood program in Chicago, and he was scared of her. And so he did everything she said. And she taught him very well about the importance of early childhood education. So he came with that sensitivity. And that was tremendously important because the Department of Education is not exactly a hotbed of early childhood, or had not been a hotbed of early childhood education. And so the administration started with this notion of this being an important effort, but it being an important effort that had to pull Ed and HHS together. And so with my counterpart in crime, Joan Lombardi, our job was to really make this an interagency effort. I think what struck me most was the willingness of the department to really take this on, even though they knew very little about early childhood. So our job was a lot of teaching, a lot of coming together, and that really resulted in a huge influx of money. We had the ARA money, if you recall, the economy was in deep trouble, and so there was Race to the Top, I-3, Promised Neighborhoods, and for Secretary Duncan, it meant making sure that all of the programs across the department had some way to reflect an early childhood agenda. So we ended that period with a strategic plan that had early childhood as a hallmark, the first part of the reform effort, that had an Office of Early Learning, which was huge, and with about really $1 billion new dollars pumped out of the Department of Education alone for early childhood. So that statement that he made a year ago took a long time. And you never know what's going to get into a State of the Union, but I think for everyone it was a matter of what's the second term agenda? What can we push? And it was interesting to see that this issue that really has probably more bipartisan support than anything, which probably isn't saying a lot these days, but it does, was the one that was chosen to be this effort, to move forward in the second term. You know, Sharon said to me, we haven't heard much about this, but even though you haven't heard much about it since that year, there's been a lot of conversation and a lot of strange things happening in the midst of sequestration, in the midst of government shutdown. So the request for a lot of money turned out to be a $250 million appropriation, which the Secretary can use for another Race to the Top early learning competition or for preschool. Now, this is not a lot of money. And so clearly there are going to have to be some decisions about how this plays out. When you're asking for millions and millions and sometimes billions, and you get 250 million, you know, any place else, that's a lot of money. It's not a lot of money in Washington. So it will be interesting to see how this money is parsed out, what choices are made. And I think right now there is still this light on early childhood education. I think it's still a focus, the focus on quality. And if you can put the administration's focus in the context of doing this because of the great concern about children entering kindergarten without the skills they need to be successful, and the sense that children are leaving third grade without the skills they need to move on successfully in school. So it's not because they have kind hearts, though they do have kind hearts, some of them, and want to do good things. This is a real reform effort that is seen as the first step. So I think that's probably what I can say and still be in my time. Did that answer your question?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, yeah, there'll be time for more questions. So, okay, you can, actually, I think we're sharing a microphone, so you can just pass it to Steve. Well, obviously, states and cities, Steve, have not waited for the federal government to take this on. I'm wondering if you can give us the lay of the land in terms of what's happening in the states, which is, I know, a tall order. And while you're doing all that in 5 to 7 minutes, can you tell us how New York and New Jersey fit into that context?
Sure. When subject to train delays, I'm actually going to have some handouts in the back that summarize some of this information, because it's when you're talking about 50 states, it's a lot. And we have tracked progress over the past decade across all of the states. If you look across the nation, it's been a story of tremendous change, but not uniform and not always good. So over the last decade, we doubled the number of 4-year-olds that states serve in pre-K programs from about 14% to 28%. So that's the best news out of this. And a number of states have implemented universal pre-K, although very few of them, and New York is an example, right, of a state that has UPK but serves less than half the kids. And partly that's because when the recession hit, enrollment gains started falling and basically ground to a halt. Another piece of this picture is quality, because quality and standards vary, and the amount of money states put behind those vary tremendously across the states. Over the last decade, overall, we made progress on quality standards. They got better. That's good news. Funding per child that was put behind those fell by over $1,000 over the last decade. So to some extent, states were making their progress in expanding enrollment by chiseling on how much money they were going to put behind each kid. And the recession made that worse. $600 of that decline was since 2008. So the recession really did wreak havoc, right? Most of these programs are not, they're more or less discretionary. It's not like K-12 where, so there's a recession, we don't increase spending as much as we would have otherwise, but you still get to go to first grade. Right? You don't necessarily get to go to the 4-year-old program if times are bad. That's a kind of, and states are all over the place. In Florida, it's glorified babysitting, and it's called UPK. You go to New Jersey, we probably have the highest standards in the country, and no surprise, I think, if you were to look at the results of those programs for kids, they're really different. And the spending levels are very different. I think they spend $2,400 per child in Florida. In New Jersey, it's $13,000 for the Abbott program. Right? About $11,000 statewide, because we have programs for other kids that aren't as intensive. And New York State is just a little below average, which I think is about 30, I don't have to guess. I actually have it written down.
That's a big range.
Right, so $3,800 basically nationally, and New York's been spending about $3,700 from the state budget, right? Not the total spending for the program, because local districts fund the program as well. What's been remarkable about, as we've moved out of the recession, and especially this year, is the number of governors and mayors who have said, economy's coming back and we're going to move forward. So I think 30 states have proposed, governors have proposed increases. Some of the governors have proposed big increases. It is not a red state, blue state issue. Some of the biggest supporters are Republican governors. Some of the most advanced states are states that are fairly conservative. So and I think that if you look at the polling data, you'd see, and Rich is probably going to talk about that. That polling data are reflective of why there's broad support, and it's not at the state level that much of a partisan issue. And now we see mayors moving ahead, which I find interesting, because if you look at the history of American education, high school was an innovation. A lot of states weren't ready to move forward statewide with high schools, and the big cities moved ahead. And you see that happening. San Francisco, Seattle, San Antonio, New York. So lots, I think that some people have said that that's actually the genius of the American governance system for education. With all of its problems with local control, it does permit innovators to move ahead locally when they're ready, and the whole state doesn't have to be ready to move at the same time.
Great. Nancy, you're up next.
Okay.
Okay, so Nancy, you are, as I've mentioned now twice, on this advisory committee of 6. And you're at the red hot center of all this right now, and I'm sure it's felt like that over the last month. The mayor just came out with his plan, which, by the way, I don't know if there are any still left, but we printed some out of the mayor's white paper. And on the table when you come in, it's there alongside the issue of the prospect, if there are any left. But anyway, in the plan, so I believe the numbers are, I have to read this, so it's full-day pre-K to all 4-year-olds by the 2015-2016 school year, which is not this one, but the next one, and which is a total of 73,000 full-day slots. And we're nowhere near that right now, right? So I should say that there is pre-K, as Steve was saying. New York has pre-K. It just has small and mostly half-day pre-K that doesn't reach most people. So still, this is a really tall order, and it's a tight timetable. So I would love to hear from you about how this is possible and why you're so excited about it.
So let me just say that this was a very long time in coming, and I just want to build on what was said before about how much has happened to lay the groundwork to be able to even have these kinds of discussions and have the kind of commitment that we have in New York City from the new mayor. And to say also to those of us, because I see lots of my colleagues here that I've been doing lots of advocacy work with over the years, you never know when something is going to click. And we were approached when Bill de Blasio was a public advocate, and this was after many years of a lot of work that we had done, and a very smart, savvy staff person approached us about how could we put together a plan around universal. So we, of course, jumped right in, gave them ideas about a plan, and then thought, well, this is nice. We've been talking about this forever. This is not going to happen. And we're finding now that that became the framework for what's being discussed. So let me just say that the process, because I think those of us that work in New York City and have tried to do things with the public sector, I really want to say it's been amazing. It's really been a partnership with folks in all of the places that we've all struggled with, for those of us who tried to move the Office of Management and Budget, for those of us who years ago when pre-K legislation first passed said the Department of Education will never talk to us and work with us, the Administration for Children's Services that manages childcare. And I think what's really important is that we think about this. We put all these names on programs. This is pre-K, this is childcare, this is Head Start. We're all talking about quality early childhood, and we see this pre-K opportunity as one of the important, what we would call foundation tiers, that's really being able to move an agenda that's part of a much broader birth through 8-year-old agenda, really looking at that broad spectrum. So people look at these numbers and they go, oh my heavens. So first of all, let me just say, there are 58,000 children enrolled in pre-K in New York City. 60% of them are in community-based organizations. That's been the trajectory since the very beginning, and as I look out here with my colleagues who provided those services and helped to make that happen, that really is very important, because we need to look at this diverse delivery system to meet this target. It's a very ambitious goal. Out of those 58,000, about 20,000 are enrolled in full-day programs. Most of the full-day programs have been traditionally in the public schools because they could meld together other pots of money that allowed them to do that. We've gone through a very arduous process, and it's also a good lesson that when a newly elected mayor and all the people that he brought in with him want something to happen and want it to happen quickly, it's amazing how the wheels of government turn for those of us who spent months often trying to, get somebody to answer a phone call. And so we believe that with all the steps that we've taken, that we have got really good grounding to make substantial growth. And I think what's really important is that this has been happening in New York City since 1998. So we have systems in place. We have a way in which to move forward in bringing new programs in, and we have a ton of work to do. So one of the things that's happened, for example, is the Department of Ed took a look at where they had potential classroom space that could be used to expand pre-K. And the amount of space they identified is quite amazing. It still needs to be really looked at, and we need to really understand the details of that space and what could actually be used. I get calls every day from early childhood programs in the community that talk to me about their ability to expand. They have empty classrooms. They know about empty classrooms in the community. We're going to need everybody to really figure out how they can do that. The third piece of making this work is obviously the teacher component. And so one of the core underpinnings of this plan is both extensive professional development, really utilizing every opportunity to move the existing workforce through a process that will get them to be fully credentialed. To really build on, the Department of Ed has identified 2,000 individuals who've become part of a registry who have B through 2 certification, which for those of you who are in the field means they've got training in working in early childhood. We're all committed to being sure that this is a high-quality program in every sense of the word. And one of the commitments that we've gotten, that some of us who've been working on this for years didn't really believe we would ever get to, is an administration that's saying they're looking at comparable salaries across settings, really coming to really address what has been a traditional huge challenge, which is that folks in early childhood programs get credentials, get fully certified, and then they move into the public education system because the starting salaries are so different. So that's still a lot of, so what we've got are, we think we've unleashed a lot of opportunities to move things forward. I think the other really important component that I want to be sure that everybody knows, because this was also extraordinarily exciting, and that is a recognition that this city is made up of very diverse populations and diverse languages. And there is an absolute upfront commitment to dual language learners, to investing in training of the people who will be coaches in the expansion of this program, to materials, to really working with programs and helping them to better meet the needs of dual language learners. So really a very high level commitment. In the plan that you have the details of, I hope everybody picked it up, you can see the details of the kinds of things that are being talked about. So there is a survey that's out, that went out, I think at the beginning of this week, to community-based organizations that have a contract with the DOE, asking them about their space availability. So we're trying to take every step that we can to make it possible and to really do this and do it right. There's real commitment around quality and doing it right. And the implementation work group are folks who over the years we've had lots of opportunity to work together. We share the same vision and goals, so it's really exciting.
Great, thank you. Rich. So as we heard a little bit from Steve, different parts of the country are in very different places in terms of policy. There are places that have no pre-K. There are places like New Jersey and Oklahoma that have incredible systems. So there's a lot of variation in terms of policy, and I was thinking that you could tell us about the variation in terms of politics. And also, so if both what we know about where we as a nation stand in terms of knowledge and sentiment on this issue, and then where the variations are in that picture.
Well, this is really an amazing time for early childhood education, especially birth to 5 early childhood education. I was hired about 6 years ago to look into how to help push it over the top for advocates, and there was a really strong social justice frame, and what we did is we switched it to an economic frame using Heckman's research and also Stevens' research. And that worked really, really well when the Tea Party took over and when you had pay-go and you had to have a pay-for up in Congress. The whole idea that these programs could pay for themselves was something that we could at least get attention for. I have a slightly strange perspective on all this because what I do is I'm a progressive. I'm very liberal, one generation removed from a tenement house on the Lower East Side. Everything I have has come through public systems, and I've gotten a great education through them. I really believe in them. I have spent maybe 30 years in the progressive, trying to get the progressive movement moving and trying to get progressive legislation going. But those 30 years have really been spent having to sell progressive ideas and issues in a conservative way, because the country is much more conservative than we are as progressives. And New York is really an island, okay? It really is an island out there. There's New York, there's San Francisco, there's Portland. I don't know what other islands are out there that are like this. So what happened in my career is we have to figure out that there are really three things going on simultaneously to create social impact. There's popularism, what people are thinking and feeling, and how are they feeling about particular issues and what are their needs. And we look at them really as consumers. What is missing in their lives that they could latch onto that's better? Then we say, well, you know what, the reason why we have to talk to them is because the best possible popularism creates the best possible politics. And the best possible politics create the best possible policy. So, you know, you can have a whole bunch of people screaming that you should have single payer and you should have birth to 5 for early childhood education. Obama's doing this and Obama's doing that. The reason is because there's not enough political traction for it. It can't be done. So when you look around the country, when we polled 6 years ago, parents around the country were very conflicted. They knew that their lives were changing. They knew it was not the 1950s anymore. They knew that they had to have 2 parents working a job. Sometimes they had to have 2 parents working 2 jobs. But they felt really guilty that they weren't working at home. And when you asked parents, not just low-income parents, but middle-income parents, what's the best way to accomplish early childhood development, early childhood education? They all said to have 1 parent at home. And then we looked at the crosstabs, and what we found was that a lot of the parents who said that were using outside services and had 2 parents working and weren't doing it in the home. So they were guilty, and they didn't want to really go out there and look for these services. They didn't want to turn outward to government for these services at that point. There was a group, maybe about 40%, but you need about 63 to really push. The other thing that we found is that there's a big disconnect between servicing the disadvantaged and the middle class not getting anything out of it. What do I get out of it? So we used Heckman's work and we used your work to say, well, what you get out of it are better education, health, and economic returns, and that's going to lower deficit spending, and you're going to pay less in taxes, and you're going to get more out of education. So we developed that message and pushed it. What's happening now is that there's been 2 polls. One was commissioned by us, and I helped work on it with the First 5 Years Fund. And that found that 68% of Americans wanted Congress to act and make grant access to low and middle income families to quality early childhood education. That's phenomenal in 6 years. That really talks to the amount of work that the advocates did and academics and other people have done to push this issue over the top. And that we had Tea Party support, and we even had support from white Republican men. So it's kind of phenomenal. Now there's just a poll before the State of the Union, and it sort of got buried in there, an NBC Wall Street Journal poll that shows that 85% of Americans want the federal government to act to provide every child with access to early childhood education within the next 2 years. Of that 85, 63% want it to be a priority this year. It is the number 3 issue after jobs, and reducing the deficit, and it doesn't drop dramatically. It's not like these other priorities are up in the 90s and it drops to 30. It's jobs is in the 90s, deficit is in the low 70s, and early childhood in terms of strong support this year is at 65%. So that's phenomenal. The trouble is that there's no pressure test against it. So, for example, I can go to people and say, do you believe in community colleges? Doug Gould and I worked on this in California. Do you believe in community colleges and that every kid should have access to a quality community college education? They say, absolutely. And then you say, okay, do you want your child to go to a community college? And they say, no, I don't. There's a difference between people's roles as a person who is participating in a civil society and the kinds of decisions that they make at the dinner table. And what you have to understand with early childhood education, as we go from it being, we have to raise awareness for it, where now there's demand for it, there are a whole bunch of consumers out there with very, very different expectations about what it is and what it should be. Now, when you're servicing low-income people, you tend to have a top-down government approach. We know what's good for you. You don't have any access, so you get what we give you. And what we give you is good because we care about you. That doesn't work when you have a universal system where you invite in a whole bunch of parents like me who are helicopter parents who want to talk to you about early childhood education theory. What is universal pre-K, and can you do your mixed programs with dual language speakers and with middle class people? How do you avoid the problem we've had with public education where you have the middle class fleeing because they want custom private services? So all these things are really critically important. And the other thing is that I don't understand when people say universal pre-K, I don't know what universal means. When the president says universal pre-K, he means everybody who's 200% over poverty is the first group that's going to be served. And then if the states have enough money and they feel generous and they want to tax people, then the middle class gets help. So if we're out there selling universal pre-K to the middle class because we know the polling numbers will pull up the middle class into the issue, and then we don't provide it to them and we only provide it to the disadvantaged, we have a big problem. And the big problem we have now, and the reason why these numbers are so high, is that the middle class is tapped out. Parental liquidity when you're young is lower than when you're older. And you can't, credit's tight. People move into as good a neighborhood as they can with the best school systems they can. They have high mortgages, and they're paying $10,000 to $13,000 a year for childcare. And you can't, that's a college tuition every year for 5 years. And you can't take a loan out on that. You can't borrow on the child's future earnings, and you can't borrow on your future earnings. So we're getting to a point where people are looking at it and saying, well, the rich can afford any care they want, and the poor get the care for free, and I'm stuck in the middle, and what do I get? And I think that's what you're seeing in these high numbers, and you really need to have that satisfied. And I'll close by just saying that because you have to work the politics, the policy, and the popularism, all of the selling of early childhood education is situational to the place where people are. So it's situational to New Jersey, it's situational to New York, it's situational to all these states, and it has to be marketed on a very state-to-state and local basis.
Fascinating. Steve, I wonder if you could, because you were just talking about, the problem of borrowing and of, liquidity. And one of the things in terms of the discussion of payment we hear is, I've heard about social impact bonds and the fact that basically, actually, this, your investment in early childhood education pays off in the long run, not just in a big way. So, Steve, can you tell us, based on, you've done cost-benefit analyses for Perry Preschool and Abecedarian, which are two of the oldest preschool programs in the country and most studied, and you've done others too. Can you give us a sense of what we're talking about in terms of what you get from your investment when you pay for a preschool, and then what that might mean for New York City?
So this is where what you do really matters, and I want to point out just one thing about the mayor's plan here in what the mayor did in New York City that is really smart, right? So if you get these returns that I'm going to talk about, if you do an intensive, well-designed quality program. So with advisors like Nancy, the mayors created a plan and then figured out what it would cost. That's not how most mayors and governors and legislators do it. They figure out how much money they want to spend, and then they come up with a plan, right? Completely different processes with totally different results, right? So Perry Preschool, Abecedarian, these are very, Perry Preschool had one teacher for every 6 kids. Right? This is it's only part day, but that's very intensive, right? Abecedarian's full day year round and provides childcare as well as education, right? The returns on this are in a kind of ballpark, an order of magnitude, right? So it doesn't matter whether you say it's 7 times bigger or 16 times bigger. It's about 10 times as big. The problem is most of the returns are really way out there in the future.
Right, meaning so for every, just to break it down, for every $1 that you invest in this program, somewhere down the line, you get back somewhere between, what did you say, 16 and 7?
Yeah,
is that it?
Walking, is it, essentially it's saying, what's the value of the stream of returns the day the kid walks in the door? Would you pay for that? And so, somewhere between, 7 times, 10 times what the cost of the program is, that's how much it's really worth actuarially the day the kid walks in the program. But a lot of those benefits are when they're adolescents and adults, right? So if you're saving on crime, if they're more productive in the workforce, and most politicians are looking 2, 4, 6 years down the road at the most. So one of the things that's interesting is if you provide full day that meets the child care needs of parents, now there are some right up front returns because you're putting people in the workforce. There are also returns because you're saving on grade retention in special education. So we actually took the results from New Jersey, looking at, so what are we saving in New Jersey in grade retention and special education costs because of the preschool program, and if other states saved proportionally, by the time the kids get from preschool get to the end of this education pipeline, what's the net fiscal impact on the state? It's not a benefit cost analysis. It's saying, just looking at my state budget, if I pay for pre-K for all the kids or all the kids under 200% of poverty, what does that do to my total P through 12 costs once the kids have made it through, so they're impacting every grade? So not a short time horizon, but it's not 30 years either, right? It's basically 10 years. And the answer is a lot of states would be spending $1 billion less, states like New York, would be spending $1 billion less on education, other things equal, if they provided pre-K to all their kids. Right? I think that's a big deal.
Yeah. That number is for New York State or New York City?
That's for New York State.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Wow. Jacqueline, this is a huge moment for New York City, and a really exciting moment, but also kind of a scary moment because, as Nancy said, there's so much work to be done. And I'm wondering, given your intimate involvement with Abbott, if you could give us a sense of some of the lessons that New Jersey might have learned the hard way that we could avoid by you telling us about them. Yeah.
We did
Get
everything
your pen out.
perfectly.
Yeah.
You know, I think that, as Nancy said, one of the most important factors in any kind of high-quality program is the teacher. And so to give this thoughtful sort of sense of what does this teacher look like, what kind of professional development and ongoing professional development is absolutely critical. And we learned that. We learned that you can have a research-based curriculum, but if it's not implemented with fidelity, then you just have a box in a room or something. You've got to have a teacher who understands why they're doing what they're doing. Not doing activities, but have real sense of child development, a real sense of how children learn, and what I like to call a kind of curiosity about children's learning, so that there is a willingness and an eagerness to understand how children are learning and to grow themselves. So the notion of high quality for me, and I think for everyone who was in New Jersey, was how do we make sure those classrooms are really supported? You have this sense of mentors and coaches. That is absolutely critical, because even a teacher who comes with a BA doesn't always come with experience. This idea that you come out of a teacher preparation program and you are now an expert, I remember the first year I taught, I was a fool. I mean, it's hard. It's very difficult, and we need to get this novice expert continuum in much better shape in our minds and give teachers the support they need. So I think New York is really right on target to think that through. The other thing that I haven't heard, maybe Nancy can talk to this, is the notion of how you know how well you're doing. And that is this constant sense of how you evaluate the effectiveness of a program. And I always think that, funders say, or legislatures say, we're going to give you money and we'll evaluate this and test kids the next year. Well, it takes time. And that realization of how much time it really takes, even with a lot of money, because you've got to build quality. People are at different levels of quality. You've got to get everybody with the same perception of what quality really is. And then to see those outcomes in kids, you're not going to see them the first year. And so you've got to figure out what is it you want to talk about. We talked about Eckers scores. I mean, we started with our coaches and master teachers really focusing on an Eckers and using that as their professional development tool, which I think was as good a thing as we could have done at the time. So I think the evaluation of the program, and I mean not just what are child outcomes, but how is the program doing? And how does the program engage in continuous program improvement? And that, I think, was an important thing that we learned over time. I think we did it reasonably well, the kind of self-assessment that you want programs to do. You do not want a program to suddenly have a bunch of scores from kids and say, we didn't know we were doing a bad job, or we don't, and then they don't know why. So how do you really train folks to understand and be curious about their programs and the kind of things they do? So the teacher, I think we can't stress that enough, and the professional development, the evaluation of the program, and the time it takes to really plot out what you would expect in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, and to really make that clear to your funders, your city funding, that don't expect test scores the end of the first year. And you think that's funny, but I tell you, it's a really interesting thing when you see folks really saying they want to see those things. I think that for New Jersey, one of the most challenging things was our mixed delivery system. If you follow the Abbott progression, it sort of goes over time in various states of legislative interest and litigation. But one of the things that was really interesting was the legislation started to talk about school-based programs and private providers, and if you remember when they left Head Start out, that was not a good idea. So to think about all of the folks who are providing services in the very beginning and get that input is really important. And I think that you're very much on track. I think that a mixed delivery system is critical because you want every child in every setting to have high quality. But that means that you're following a set of standards that everybody agrees on, and that you're going across all of those venues and making sure that you have fidelity of implementation, teachers are getting supported, parents are engaged. It's hard work. And I think one of the things we don't always realize is just how labor intensive this kind of work is, which makes it expensive, because you've got to continuously support. So if you've got teachers, you've got a way of constantly evaluating, sort of ongoing evaluation and self-assessment. I think that's important. The parent engagement piece, it's so important to find ways in which parents are understanding what's going on with their kids and really participating in this. If we could make that go up to the early elementary grades, that would be wonderful, have the same kinds of skills. And then I think this, and you mentioned this, Nancy, this notion we have of having a continuum from preschool to third grade, it is so important. We didn't do that in the very beginning. We had enough to do. And the commissioner, when she instituted a division of early childhood, gave us authority over preschool to third grade. That is absolutely critical. While preschool is wonderful, it's not a magic bullet. And if children go into kindergarten, first and second grades that are of low quality, then you really have not spent your money wisely. So to really have a continuum of services and a kind of alignment of standards. I remember we had to align the standards, the pre-K standards with the K-12 standards. This was pre-Common Core. And I was called into a room where, my preschool staff was just sitting looking at these people in early elementary, and they were looking at them, and they just thought, who are these people? It's not as easy as you think to have that alignment. But I think that it's a wonderful opportunity to push those social emotional skills up and really have both groups learn from each other. So that alignment, I think, is critical, and I think it bears out in the kinds of results you see for kids.
It was really interesting in doing research on the Abbott program, seeing they actually had hired, I was in Orange, and they had hired a teacher specifically to go around and tell the other kindergarten teachers that a lot of these kids could actually read, and yes, they could do these things, and to basically raise the expectations of kindergarten teachers, because they didn't realize that all these kids were coming from pre-K and were...
So kindergarten is a kind of forgotten area. I mean, it is really an extraordinary thing. I remember asking in an assistant commissioners meeting who had responsibility for kindergarten, and you have these assistant commissioners all looking at each other, like, who does kindergarten? I mean, it is that place where you can make a huge difference, but everybody's focused on preschool. If other people are focused then on middle school and some on high school, kindergarten gets really lost. And so one of the things that was really interesting in New Jersey was to do a set of Eckers on kindergarten, so that it was fascinating. And it gave you real data to say there's work that needs to be done here. And now the folks in New Jersey have really done a set of kindergarten guidelines, and they have a video. So I think that you've got to really still pay attention to kindergarten and see it as a package deal.
Great. I had tried to hold off for a long time for asking this question, but I see that it's almost time to open up the conversation. So, Steve, I wanted to ask you about funding. And, obviously in New York, we're having a sort of hot debate about this now, about whether we should pay for the program with tax dollars or with state money or with a city tax. And I'm wondering, given your vast knowledge of how folks do it in other places, if you have thoughts on the benefits, of one versus the other.
Well, the state does not have a good history in keeping its promises. And New York is not alone. This is perhaps an iron law of politics that, left to their own devices, politicians will spread as little money as possible over as many voters as possible. And that's certainly what we've seen as a kind of national pattern with these state programs over the last decade. And the places that doesn't happen is where they have a financing mechanism that prevents that. It's in the school funding formula. So
Right.
it's not an option to say, oh, we're not going to give if you don't give preschool as much this year, you're not giving anybody pre-K through 12 an increase, right? So I love the idea that the mayor said he's going to put the money in a lockbox, right? That you can't rate it and spend it on something else because something came up and you decided this priority wasn't so important after all, or schools are thinking, well, we really could use it for something else, and they don't take tests until 3rd grade, so maybe we get the money into 3rd grade. Not a smart decision, and he's not going to let them make it. And I think the states that have made progress have been the ones that have some mechanism. Well, New Jersey, you cannot move that money from, right? Jacqueline, when she was the assistant commissioner, would have taken the money back if you had not spent it on preschool.
But Steve, the governor is offering a blank check.
Well, it's a blank check on an account to which he has not made a deposit.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's what worries people.
Got it. Okay.
Can I just add
Yeah,
one
please.
thing to that?
Mhm.
Because I think when you look at the history around pre-K, this is sort of building on these promises. First, we had a 5-year promise in 1997. Then we had a second 5-year promise with a jump up in funding during the Spitzer administration. And now we're back again to, this multi-year promise. And we've seen over the years, unless you have a regular, reliable, appropriate level of funding, it's impossible for to develop this program at the level at which you need it. And so this has kept, outside of the city, we face the challenges of smaller school districts that really have not come into the program. So children in other parts of the state don't even have access to pre-K. We've made great strides in New York City and have a long way to go yet, but that was because we have this huge school district on which to build from. So this level of funding, really understanding that, locking it in by whatever means you're going to do it, is really critical.
Did you want to say something? Yep. Rich?
I agree there has to be permanent funding. We just lobbied and got 1.5 billion restored federally in the appropriations process. It was a huge win. It was sequestration plus a whole load of money added on top of it. So we backfilled sequestration, we got that, and it's a huge victory, and we're really happy. And the next day, we sit down in a huddle, and we have to have a strategy for next year's appropriation. That's a problem. You can pass a bill, but until the money's appropriated, you don't have anything. And so there's a process there. On the other hand, when you look at New York, when I got off the train, I was expecting to see people in limousines driving around with pitchforks and ready to kill people. If you can get away with taxing the rich here of people over $500,000, that's great. Good luck. I think it's wonderful that you can do that. I don't know if you can actually do it yet, if the traction point is hit on that. I think maybe one of the reasons why the governor is offering a blank check is that he may want to do something statewide, and what's happening in New York in terms of turning this into a class issue as opposed to a wider issue about the value of early childhood education and then figuring out a fair way to pay for it may be a reason why he's doing it.
Got it. Okay. Oh, Steve? Yeah, please.
One quick point about
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
because I was in Albany yesterday, and a representative from the Upper East Side said she didn't have a problem because her constituents knew they were going to be taxed for this, and they were just fine. So, and when we pulled this in New Jersey, and we weren't even offering universal across the state, right? It's universal in cities with high concentrations of poverty. We had 85% of the voters in New Jersey saying they were in favor of this. And it goes to Rich's point about there is something in it for them, even if it's not their kids. Here, there is something in it for them when it's not their kids, and it's their kids. And so it actually turns out it's not a divisive class war issue. It's a who has the ability to pay for this issue, and if we're getting something for it, which we are, then we're happy to pay for results.
And the other thing is, in New York State, we have to do something where we are going to have a both and. There has to be something that happens statewide to expand access across the state, and there's great momentum. Other mayors in New York State are also calling for a huge expansion in pre-K. And at the same time, to allow the city to take care of its own business. So this is partially a home rule issue, and the fact that we can do things here in New York City that are not doable in other parts of the state. You know, just as you said, the politics, New York's politics are very complicated, and there's the upstate, downstate divide, as you well know. And so the fact that we've got the commitment and the underpinning and foundation here, I just can't stress that enough. I mean, all of the things that Jackie laid out are things that we have started. Some of them we really are going to beef up now in this new initiative. Things like coaching, things like greater investment in professional development, the systems for evaluation, but all the initial framework is really been there and developed over the years. So,
Well, I think we should open up the discussion. I want to ask one last thing, though. I know that I am not alone in wanting to know how we can help. Like, this, I feel like there's this boulder, and there are a few people behind it. Like, what exactly, what can the folks in this room do to make this move?
you can use your voice and your commitment and action. I have several people from my organization who are here. We'd love to take the card of anyone who would like to get involved. There's a series of kinds of activities going on. There's rallies, there's tweeting, there's going on Facebook, there's going to Albany, there's letters to the editor, all the usual ways that we can move this agenda. You've seen the incredible amount of press attention. It's really out there. It's now, I think, up to all of us to push it to a win, quite frankly. And so we need everyone in this room to get involved, talk to friends, talk to colleagues, talk to your elected officials. Let everyone know you really support this. And we make the promise at CCI that we will keep you informed of all of the events that are happening. If you want to raise your hand, Sherry and Tiara? If you can let them know that you're really interested and want to be involved, we'll promise to keep in touch with you.
Great. So we welcome questions now. If you want a mic, let us know. Otherwise, just belt it out. Go ahead. Do you want the mic?
Do you want a mic? Oh, sorry.
Actually, it's on the wire. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. It is. If I get my beard out.
Thank you for your mapping of a scene which seems to be and involve huge problems, especially in terms of numbers. And but you've all emphasized the problem of financing this and how you can get more money, and you're all very excited that it's going through, and you want us to maintain pressure to make sure that it does happen and we get more money. And I think everybody can agree with you on that. But I'm wondering why it sounds a bit like an industrial production process where you sound as if you're going to measure results in terms of repayment to the state of the investment, and saying things like, according to research, you get 7 to 9 times the amount of your cost of your program back for the state. And I'm wondering, what do we know about pre-K education, which involves quality and the kind of education that should be done with pre-K children? And is there some measure of quality and results other than this economic one. Is it? Thanks.
Well, I'll take a short answer. I think actually anybody here could answer that question. Sure. Jacqueline talked a lot about having an evaluation system in place, and that sounds a lot like the standard accountability talk in some ways, and in early childhood it's really not. It's like having a GPS. Right? So the GPS isn't, as I like to tell my wife, it's not about who got us lost. We know we're lost. It's about looking at the GPS to see how we get where we're going and making sure we're going in the right direction. Right? Well, that's what we do with early childhood programs. So we've been doing that in New Jersey. We do class. So teachers self-evaluate. They've been given a system and trained to evaluate their own practice, to self-evaluate. They have coaches who come in and have aligned instruments and work with them on, so I'm not getting this right, but I don't know why. How is that going to get fixed? Well, because a coach is going to come in and tell me, right? And then we have, on top of that, external evaluations where we use standardized observation instruments that get at, are the right materials in the classroom? Are the right activities going on? Is the teacher appropriately warm? And it's aligned with what we want kids to learn, what we want teachers to do. And pretty much every state has these standards now that are pretty good for what we want children to learn, how we want them to develop, and what we want teachers to do. They don't all have these systems in place that then measure, is that really taking place? And it's mostly about looking at what's going on in the classrooms. Should there, in addition, be some check about the kids' learning and development? I think so. That doesn't mean you test every kid, right? But states are putting these systems into place. They're very broad. They're not just about simple literacy and math skills. They're about social and emotional development. They're about physical health and development. They're very broad. And they're the kinds of things that I think parents really care about their kids experiencing and their kids developing.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, as Steve said, there are a broad range of domains that you really want to look at. We're not talking about just a single focus on math and literacy, though those are important, but there are these non-cognitive skills that I don't like that term, but you know what I mean, those sort of approaches to learning that are critical for life. Those are things you want to look at, but you also want to look at the ways in which teachers are interacting with children, and we have now measures of that. You want to look at the environment. I think you want to have programs that are constantly asking, how can we do this better? How are we doing? And that doesn't mean that they're doing badly. It simply means they want to know how they're doing. I do not believe that the ultimate evaluation of a program should necessarily be a single score from a child. I mean, that's an important part of the package, but you've got to look at the whole deal. How many teachers do you have who are certified? What's the breakdown for teacher experience and certification? I mean, if you're dealing with a group of kids and the teacher has a high school diploma, those are very different results you'd probably be getting than if a teacher has a master's degree and a lot of experience. So I think telling the story of the program is really critical. So I'd like to see a more comprehensive view of programs in which you understood all those sort of inputs and the kind of demographics around that could possibly explain why you're getting the kinds of child outcomes you get. But it's bigger than just a score.
Yes, and do you want to, would you identify yourself too when you ask your question?
Yeah, okay. I'm Tamara Moreau. I'm from the CECD2, Community Education Council District 2. I'm also an early childhood special ed teacher and assistant director at a full-day year-round child care center. So I have so many questions are buzzing through my mind. I have concerns about the Common Core and the overly academic focus and how that, I think, it elementary school could be a beautiful pathway to emergent project-based curriculum, but our assessment tools are not necessarily pushing teachers in that direction. I'm concerned about that happening in pre-K. But as a community education council member, I'm particularly concerned with space allocation. The notion of, we have many overcrowded school districts. Our school district, District 2, is very overcrowded, very oversubscribed. So schools have had to cut pre-K. You know, we're a middle class to a large degree school district where people would probably really buy into this, might buy into it equally for other areas, but there's a need for it, an economic need even for middle class families. I'm really concerned about the charter school opening up space because of what that could result, what that could lead to in the long run. So I'm wondering who's looking at the long-term implications of where these spaces are located and how that might impact the future of public education in the city.
Okay. These are critically important concerns. There's not a simple pat answer. The one thing I would say to you is that the group that has been working on implementation recognizes these very complicated space allocation issues, that one of the important reasons for looking at, or one of many reasons, and by no means the only or the most important, but if you're really looking at communities and the capacity in communities to provide early childhood services, so you're really thinking of not just a public school building, but you're thinking of public school buildings and other early childhood facilities in the community and really doing appropriate planning. We think that will make a huge difference in being sure that services are appropriately available. I know there's been great concern over the last few years on all of the, and I'm not weighing in any way on the issues around the allocation of school space, et cetera. I think that there is now an effort to really take a careful look at how to best utilize facilities and how to identify where there's capacity to expand in the community in a variety of ways that's both strengthening opportunities for families and really, appropriately utilizing capacity in the schools. And as you know, every neighborhood, this is a city of a whole lot of neighborhoods and communities, and what you can say about one part of the city doesn't apply at all to another part of the city. So we have to be very careful and thoughtful in doing this, and I'm hopeful that that's exactly what will happen here. There is facilities money in the plan, but new facilities take time, take a lot of time. And so I think this is really more of the kind of, I think you're asking about the immediate short term and what's been happening.
It's an operational issue, and this is more
Yeah.
using the operational budget.
Yeah.
But I think to be successful, there's going to have to be a facilities budget.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I haven't
And
heard talk of that.
and one of the things that has been going on is to, again, when you get all of the city agencies pulling together, there's a look at utilizing the tools of the agency that focuses on economic development in the city. There's look at unutilized space and variety of kinds of schools that have closed down. So there's an attempt to really be as thoughtful and proactive as we can in addressing the facilities issue, which is always a huge issue in New York.
Great. So, you first. Yes.
My name is Richard Oppenheimer. I retired a year ago after being a director of the early childhood program for 42 years. And I was vice president of the Public School Supervisors Union of New York City, CSA, representing the directors of early childhood programming that was represented by the union. And my question is to Jacqueline Jones and to anyone else. And that is, when speaking to success, teachers and coaches were mentioned. And I sat here a few minutes ago thinking about music, which is a centerpiece of my life. And I thought about the New York Philharmonic. And I thought about the greatest conductor of that orchestra in my lifetime, and that was Leonard Bernstein. And I thought, now I'm not as old as I'm going to sound, of the NBC orchestra that I saw at the beginning era of television, Toscanini as a conductor. Now, they both took opposite methodology when it came to their leadership of two different orchestras that they were able to get passion from. And so when speaking of these, this pre-K program, and speaking about what's crucial is the teaching and the coaching, but not the leadership of the operation. Do you think that that's a crucial element to getting the passion from the staff to succeed?
I
and
think
the parents?
leadership is always going to be critical. You can have the most passionate teachers on the planet, but if they don't have someone in that building who has the vision and the ability to lead them on, you get frustration and people leaving. So I think, the notion of leadership is critical. What we did in New Jersey, it was kind of interesting. We had a court order that said you have to have preschool, and strangely enough, not all the principals were jumping for joy when they found out that they had to have 3- and 4-year-old children in their building. But we did have a year-long course for administrators, because basically they didn't understand early childhood education. And that's not their fault. They weren't ever expecting to have to do this. And so with a year of folks come up to Trenton and we'll have this course and we'll talk about the sort of basics of early childhood and what this means, we got some of the most passionate converts to early childhood we've ever seen. So I think you are absolutely right that there is a need, and it's probably critical for the success of any building or any structure to have a leader who is saying, this is what we're going to be doing, and this is the support you're going to have to do it. So you provide a vision of what you want to happen and engage people in that, and then making sure people have the tools that they need to be successful. I think that's absolutely critical. Anybody else?
Over there, yes, in the blue shirt.
Hi, my name is Kolben Hamilton. I'm a reporter with a local news website called DNA Info. I wanted to ask the folks from New Jersey, or have been in New Jersey, about the Abbott school systems. Some of the folks in Albany and some other folks outside of Albany have raised concerns about the rollout of this program. It's been about 18 months, and all the kids will be in the UPK. I know the Abbott school system took about a decade to finally get to where it is now. And I just wanted to see if you could sort of address the idea of this rollout happening really fast. Are there any issues that you think might happen because of that, and maybe some ways to mitigate any problems that might develop?
Start. You can.
Okay.
So I think the rollout is appropriate because you want to get kids in programs and you want to make sure that they're getting the best that they can get at the time. But you also want to keep your eye on a vision out there of the quality that you see as the ideal. So I would suspect that you have in mind a way that you will be monitoring quality and making sure that you're increasing quality over time. For Abbott, I mean, when we took a look at the Ecker scores, and you guys know this is a look at the classroom quality, it's a measure of that. In the very beginning, it was not pretty. And that was not surprising because there were kids in seats, but they were not having quality. And so we monitored constantly how that quality was going. We had people in those programs and looked constantly at what the trajectory of those scores were doing. Constantly going up, that's good. Someplace where they're really level, you go in, you put more people. So that's when I said labor intensive, because you've got to figure out who needs what, where. They're not going to all be the same. They're going to need certain things, but you've got to make sure that those folks have the support they need. And so I don't see anything wrong with that rollout as long as you have in mind having the kid in the seat isn't quality. Making sure that, and there's a tension between increasing access and putting children in seats and building quality. You can't say kids stay home until we make sure that every place has high quality, but you can make a really strong effort to build quality to make sure that what that child has in that classroom is better than they would have if they just stayed at home.
I'm thrilled you asked that question because I think it's my fault that people think it takes 10 years to do this. And what I meant when I said that was it took us a decade to get where we are now. The outcomes that I have seen for kids in 5th grade that I talk about, that's for kids that were in the program 4 or 5 years on, right? So it didn't take us 10 years to get to good. It took us 10 years to get where we are now, which is better than good. But we were much better even 2-3 years down the line. You can't put teachers in classrooms and coach them to excellence and then bring the kids on later, right? So you want to ramp up as fast as you can and get as many teachers as possible through the first couple of rough years. Get them in the system, have this all moving. And yes, to get to excellent, it could take a decade. To get to good, you can do that much faster.
We're sort of out of time. I'll take one more, but I think the panelists will be here for a few minutes right afterwards. If you have a burning question, why don't you ask the last question and then we'll wrap it up.
My name is Donna Anderson. I am from the Institute for Children's Poverty and Homelessness here in New York City. And so I had a question both for the New Jersey folks as well as for the New York folks, in that when I think about universal pre-K, I'm looking at universal from the other side. So how is it universal for those most hard to reach kids, kids who are living in shelter, kids who are living in doubled up situations? So I'd like to know what your thoughts are about how do we reach those families and how do we make it easier for providers to provide that service to those families? How has it been done in New Jersey or addressed in New Jersey? And what is the thought about that in New York City?
Well, I'll tell you the simplest answer, which is when you see a 4-year-old in New Brunswick, which in McDonald's during the school day, which is where I work, you know that kid should be in school. Where you don't have a universal program, you don't know that. Everybody knows if you got a 3 or 4-year-old, they can go, and it's free. And that makes, I think, a huge difference in the outreach. That doesn't mean you still don't have to work really hard at outreach.
Well, and especially when you've got things like transportation issues.
Sure.
That
And
are really a
that's
struggle.
part of the reflection that programs have to engage in. How's our outreach? Who are we reaching? I mean, we've got kids, but what percentage of kids still need to be there? And so we had outreach plans being submitted. If we would look at each district and see where they were. They'd submit numbers, and if we thought, this is not going as well as it should be, then we'd sit down and have a conversation about strategies that could be used to increase outreach. Kids in homeless shelters, they were part of that program. We had to get to them, get them in there, and get transportation. So our transportation costs were significant at times, but that's where the kids were, and they had to get to the right kind of center, and that's what we had to do. We had to get them there.
And interagency cooperation, right? Some agency knows those kids are in a homeless shelter, right? That agency can connect.
Excellent suggestion.
So this is a really important, critical issue, and I would say we're going to need everybody's help to figure out that we've thought about all of the different things that we need to think about in reaching this population. There's been lots of work and concern over the years, whether you called it childcare, pre-K, to really push to have early childhood services available to homeless and formerly homeless children and to do it right. And we make progress and then we lose some ground, quite frankly. And the Department of Education has made big efforts actually over the last year to do door-to-door outreach and reach hard-to-reach populations in terms of letting them know. We're going to have to do much more of that, and we need organizations like yours and people that are helping us all to understand we haven't figured everything out, and that we need to really be sure that this is a population that we're appropriately serving. What I will say is, because we're at a point with the new administration, it's an extraordinary opportunity for us to say, this is what we're really at a point where policies could change. And this is an important time for us to say, here are the kinds of things that we need to do. And people are, when people are excited and there's some resources out there, all of a sudden, the kinds of solutions that you need to come up with, the impossible becomes possible. So this is an area we would love to hear more from you about what you are seeing now from your organization's work, of where we've missed certain strategies that should be put in place. And I think that reflects on everyone who's doing this work right now.
So I want to thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. It's such a delight to have these great minds together. I've talked to them all individually, but to see them together is wonderful. People will be here to discuss for a few minutes at least if you have other questions. So thanks very much. I really appreciate it.